Hello and welcome to the Very Audible Stories. In today's videos, it would be a stories about a hidden kindness coming from a mafia bosses whom everyone feared. If you like these videos, please share your thoughts on the comment sections and subscribe to the channel to receive notifications about new videos. Thank you.
Elena Rossi stood in her wedding dress, staring at the stranger zipping her into what should have been the happiest moment of her life. But the hands were wrong, cold, efficient, unfamiliar. When she turned, she didn't find a bridesmaid's smile. She found Victor Caldero's ice-gray eyes and the kind of silence that swallows screams. "Your groom isn't coming," he said, voice smooth as a blade. "But I am." In 30 seconds, Elena's dream died. In 60, she was gone, taken from her own wedding while 200 guests pretended not to see. Want to know what happens when your fairy tale becomes your nightmare? Stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city below so I can see how far Elena's story travels. The bridal suite at the Grand Meridian Hotel smelled like gardenias and lies. Elena Rossi stood before the full-length mirror, her reflection a stranger in ivory silk and delicate lace. The dress hugged her curves perfectly, too perfectly perhaps for a woman who'd spent the last 3 months surviving on coffee and wedding anxiety. Her dark hair was swept into an elegant updo, small white flowers tucked among the curls like promises she was about to make, promises to a man she barely knew anymore. The thought slithered through her mind before she could stop it. Elena pressed her palms against the cool glass of the mirror, forcing herself to breathe. This was normal. Every bride had doubts. Every woman wondered if she was making the right choice when standing on the edge of forever. "You're being ridiculous," she whispered to her reflection. "Marco loves you." The woman in the mirror didn't look convinced. Behind her, the suite door opened. Elena turned, expecting to see her maid of honor, her cousin Sophia, who'd disappeared 20 minutes ago to check on the flowers. Instead, a woman she'd never seen before stepped inside. Tall, severe, dressed in black despite the celebration happening 3 floors below. "Oh, I'm sorry," Elena said, confusion creasing her brow. "I think you have the wrong room. This is the bridal suite." The woman didn't respond. She simply closed the door with a quiet click that sounded unnaturally loud in the suddenly too small space. "Excuse me?" Elena's voice sharpened. "Can I help you with something?" "Turn around." The woman's accent was Eastern European, her tone utterly flat, not a request, a command. Elena's heart began to hammer against her ribs. "I don't know who you think you are, but you need to leave. Right now. My wedding starts in 20 minutes, and your dress is unzipped. Turn around." Elena glanced over her shoulder at the mirror. The woman was right. The long line of tiny pearl buttons down her spine gaped open, the zipper beneath them only halfway closed. Sophia had been in the middle of fastening them when she'd rushed out to handle some crisis with the centerpieces. Every instinct Elena possessed screamed at her to refuse, to call security, to run. But she was alone in a locked room with a stranger, wearing a dress she couldn't remove by herself, and the woman's hands were already moving toward her. "Please hurry," Elena managed, her voice tight. "My cousin will be back any moment." "No," the woman said, her fingers cold and efficient as they worked the zipper upward. "She won't." The words hit Elena like ice water. "What did you say?" "Your cousin received a text from your mother. There's been an accident. She left through the service entrance 4 minutes ago." Elena spun around, nearly stumbling in her heels. "What? What accident? Is my mother okay?" "There was no accident." The woman's expression remained completely neutral, as if they were discussing the weather. "The text was sent from a burner phone. Your cousin is currently in a taxi heading to St. Michael's Hospital, where she will find your mother perfectly healthy and very confused." The room tilted. Elena grabbed the back of a nearby chair to steady herself. "I don't understand. Why would someone—" "Because you needed to be alone." A new voice, male this time, cultured and cold as winter steel. "And you are remarkably difficult to isolate, Miss Rossi. You surround yourself with people like a woman who knows she's in danger." Elena's head snapped toward the bedroom door of the suite. A man stood in the doorway, not the same entrance the woman had used, but the private door that connected to the master bedroom. He must have been there the entire time, waiting in the shadows while Elena had stared at her reflection and wondered if she was making a mistake. She knew immediately who he was, though they'd never met. You didn't grow up in the old neighborhood without learning to recognize wolves in expensive suits. Victor Caldero was shorter than she'd imagined from the whispered stories, maybe 5'9", but he carried himself like a man who'd never been looked down upon. His dark hair was swept back from a face that might have been handsome if it weren't so utterly devoid of warmth. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Elena's entire wedding, and his eyes, gray like storm clouds, like steel, like the barrel of a gun, fixed on her with the kind of attention that made her feel simultaneously visible and transparent. "I don't know you," Elena said, proud that her voice didn't shake. "You need to leave." "You do know me." Victor stepped fully into the room, and the woman in black moved to stand by the door, blocking the exit. "Perhaps not personally, but you know what I am, who I am. I can see it in your eyes. You're afraid, but not surprised." Elena's mind raced. She'd heard stories about Victor Caldero since she was a child. He was a ghost story mothers used to frighten daughters into coming home before dark. He was the reason certain streets stayed quiet after midnight, the reason certain debts never went unpaid, the reason certain men simply disappeared when they crossed lines that should never be crossed. He was the king of a kingdom built on blood and fear, and he was standing in her bridal suite 20 minutes before her wedding. "I don't want any trouble," Elena said carefully. "Whatever this is about, I'm sure there's been some mistake. I'm just a waitress. I don't have anything you could possibly want." "A waitress?" Victor's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Yes, at Gianni's on Lombard Street. You work the dinner shift, Tuesday through Saturday. You make decent tips because you remember the regular customers' names and their usual orders. You live alone in a studio apartment in the Sunset District, 3rd floor facing the street, terrible water pressure. You take the 28 bus to work because you sold your car 6 months ago to help pay for this wedding." Each detail landed like a physical blow. Elena's breath came shorter, faster. "How do you—" "You applied for 3 credit cards to cover the deposit on this venue. 2 were declined. The 3rd has an interest rate that borders on predatory, but you signed anyway because Marco convinced you that you deserved a fairy tale wedding." Victor moved closer, his footsteps silent on the plush carpet. "He was very persuasive, wasn't he? Very charming. Told you that you'd been invisible for too long, that you deserved to be seen, to be celebrated. Made you feel like a princess when you'd spent your whole life feeling like a servant." Tears burned Elena's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You have no right to talk about him. You don't know anything about us." "I know everything about you, Elena." Victor was close now, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and cold. "I know your father abandoned your family when you were 7. I know your mother cleaned houses for 20 years to keep you and your brother fed. I know you put yourself through community college while working full-time, and that you still send money home even though your mother tells you not to. I know you are kind and loyal and far too trusting for a world as cruel as this one." "Stop." Elena's voice cracked. "Just stop. What do you want from me?" Victor reached into his jacket pocket. Elena flinched, her body bracing for violence, but he only withdrew an envelope, cream-colored, expensive paper, unsealed. "I want you to read this," he said, holding it out to her, "and then I want you to understand why your groom will not be walking down that aisle today." Elena stared at the envelope like it was a snake. "I don't want to read anything. I want you to leave so I can get married." "Marco Santini is not in the building." Victor's voice was patient, almost gentle, which somehow made everything worse. "He left through the loading dock 30 minutes ago. By now, he's halfway to the airport with a one-way ticket to Barcelona and a new passport under a name you wouldn't recognize." The world stopped. "You're lying," Elena whispered, but the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. "I'm many things, Miss Rosie, but I am not a liar. Not about this." Victor placed the envelope on the dresser beside her. "Your fiancé has been stealing from me for the past 8 months. Small amounts at first, skimming from shipments, inflating invoices, pocketing the difference. He thought he was clever. He thought he could hide in the chaos of my organization and take what he pleased without consequence. Elena's legs felt like water. She sank into the chair she'd been gripping, the elaborate wedding dress pooling around her like a deflated dream. No, Marco works in marketing. He sells software. He wouldn't. He works for me. Victor's tone remained maddeningly calm. He has for 3 years. He processes shipments, manages inventory, coordinates with suppliers. The software company is a shell, a convenient fiction for people like you who prefer their fairy tales uncomplicated. I don't believe you. You don't want to believe me. There's a difference. Victor gestured toward the envelope. Read it, Elena, or don't. Either way, the outcome remains the same. With trembling hands, Elena opened the envelope. Inside were photographs, grainy, clearly taken from surveillance cameras, but unmistakable. Marco entering buildings she'd never seen. Marco shaking hands with men who looked like they ate fear for breakfast. Marco counting money, stacks and stacks of it, in what looked like a warehouse. And then, the final photograph. Marco at an airport check-in counter, taken less than an hour ago according to the timestamp. He wore jeans and a baseball cap, carrying a single duffel bag. He looked relaxed. He looked free. He looked like a man who'd just escaped something. No. Elena's voice broke. No, this can't be real. Marco loves me. He asked me to marry him. He planned this whole day. He wouldn't just... He planned this day very carefully, Victor interrupted, as his exit strategy. You were his cover, Elena, his proof of normalcy. A sweet, innocent waitress with no connections to my world, no knowledge of what he really did. Who would suspect a man planning an elaborate wedding of embezzling from a crime lord? Who would look at a woman like you and see anything but exactly what you are? Honest, hardworking, decent? The words were knives, each one cutting deeper than the last. Elena felt herself fragmenting, the careful story she'd built about her life crumbling like sand. He used you, Victor continued, and there was something almost like sympathy in his voice now. He used your kindness, your trust, your desperate desire to be loved. He knew you would believe his lies because you wanted them to be true. And when the time came to disappear, he knew you would be the perfect distraction, a bride left at the altar, a scandal to occupy attention while he slipped away. Elena couldn't breathe. The corset of the wedding dress felt like it was crushing her ribs, squeezing the air from her lungs. If this is true, if any of this is true, why are you telling me? Why not just let him go and leave me here? Because Marco made a critical error in judgment. Victor's eyes went cold again, the brief flash of sympathy vanishing like it had never existed. He thought he could buy his escape with information. He thought if he gave me something valuable enough, I would let him walk away from what he'd stolen. Dread pooled in Elena's stomach like poison. What kind of information? Victor was silent for a long moment, studying her with an intensity that made her want to disappear. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost gentle. You. The single word hung in the air between them like a death sentence. I don't understand, Elena said, but even as the words left her mouth, pieces were clicking together in her mind. Terrible, impossible pieces that couldn't possibly fit but did. Your father didn't abandon your family 20 years ago because he was weak or selfish, Victor said. He ran because he'd stolen $12 million from my organization and knew the penalty for that kind of betrayal. He disappeared so thoroughly that even I, with all my resources, all my reach, couldn't find him. For 20 years, I've wondered where Antonio Rossi went. And then, 3 weeks ago, Marco Santini walked into my office and told me exactly where he'd been hiding all along. Elena's mind went blank with shock. My father is dead. He died in a car accident when I was 7. My mother received a death certificate. We had a funeral. You had a funeral for a closed casket and a story your mother needed to believe to survive. Victor's expression didn't change. Your father is very much alive, Elena, and according to Marco, you know exactly where he is. That's insane. Elena stood abruptly, the dress tangling around her legs. I haven't seen my father since I was a child. I don't know where he is. I don't know anything about any money. This is crazy. You're crazy. Marco was very specific. Victor pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and turned it toward her. He said your father has been in contact with you for the past 5 years, that he sends money every month through a third-party service, that you know his new name, his new location, his new life, and that in exchange for this information, you would testify that you'd never heard from him, that you believed he was truly dead. Marco thought your innocence would protect you. He thought I would accept his betrayal in exchange for a lead on your father. Elena stared at the phone screen. It showed a bank statement, her bank statement, with monthly deposits of $2,000 from an offshore account. Deposits she'd never seen before because they weren't real, couldn't be real. This is fabricated, she said, her voice rising. I've never received money from anyone. My bank statements don't show any of this. Marco lied to you. He made this up to save himself. Perhaps. Victor pocketed the phone. Or perhaps you've been very clever about hiding it. Either way, I find myself with an interesting problem. I have a thief who claims his bride knows the location of a much bigger thief. I have documentation that suggests this might be true, and I have a wedding with 200 guests waiting downstairs who will soon begin to wonder why the bride hasn't appeared. Elena's hands clenched into fists. I am not going to let you ruin my life based on lies told by a criminal trying to save his own skin. Your life was ruined the moment Marco Santini decided you were worth less than his freedom. Victor's voice was cold again, all pretense of sympathy gone. The question now is what happens next? I'm leaving. Elena moved toward the door, but the woman in black stepped forward, blocking her path. Elena turned to try the other door, but Victor was there, close enough that she could see the absolute absence of mercy in his eyes. No, he said softly. You're not. You can't keep me here. There are 200 people downstairs. Someone will notice. Someone will call the police. The police? Victor's laugh was soft and utterly humorless. Elena, half the police force is on my payroll. The other half knows better than to interfere with my business. As for the people downstairs, they're already being told that the bride has taken ill. Food poisoning, perhaps. A terrible shame, but these things happen. The wedding will be postponed. The guests will go home. And you will come with me. Terror spiked through Elena's chest, sharp and cold. Where? Somewhere we can continue this conversation without interruption. Victor nodded to the woman by the door. Svetlana, please help Miss Rossi change into something more appropriate for travel. Don't touch me. Elena backed away until she hit the wall. I'm not going anywhere with you. I don't care what Marco told you. I don't care about your money or my father or any of this. You have the wrong person. I am nobody. I know nothing. Just let me go. Victor studied her for a long moment, and Elena saw something flicker across his face. Calculation, assessment, decision. You truly believe you're innocent, he said finally. You're not pretending. You genuinely have no idea what I'm talking about. Hope flared in Elena's chest. Yes, exactly. So you see, this is all a mistake. A terrible mistake, but one we can fix. You can let me go and I'll forget this ever happened. I won't tell anyone, I promise. Oh, Elena. Victor's expression was almost pitiful. You still don't understand. It doesn't matter if you're innocent. It doesn't matter if Marco lied about everything. What matters is that he tried to trade you for his freedom, which means you have value to him. And anything that has value to my enemies has value to me. The hope died as quickly as it had bloomed. You're going to hold me hostage. I'm going to keep you safe, Victor corrected. There's a difference. If Marco truly cares about you, and I suspect he does in his own twisted way, he'll resurface when he learns you're in my custody. He'll try to negotiate, and when he does, I'll have both what he stole and what he attempted to bargain with, a satisfying conclusion to an irritating problem. And if he doesn't care, if he's already gone and never looks back, Victor's smile was blade sharp. Then you and I will have a longer conversation about your father and what you really know about $12 million that's been missing for 20 years. Elena wanted to scream, to fight, to do anything but stand there in her wedding dress while her entire life collapsed around her. But Svetlana was already moving forward with a garment bag, and Victor was watching her with the patient attention of a predator who knew his prey had nowhere left to run. Please, Elena whispered, hating the break in her voice. Please don't do this. I'm afraid you don't have a choice in the matter. Victor checked his watch. We have approximately 8 minutes before hotel security begins their rounds on this floor. Svetlana will help you change. You will leave this room quietly and calmly, walking between us as if we're old friends escorting you to a car. You will not cry out. You will not attempt to run. You will not do anything foolish that might result in bystanders getting hurt. Do you understand? And if I refuse? Victor's expression didn't change, but his voice dropped to something that made Elena's blood run cold. Then I will have Svetlana render you unconscious, and we will carry you out through the service entrance. You will wake up in the same place either way, but one option allows you to maintain your dignity. Choose wisely. Elena looked at the woman called Svetlana, at her dead eyes and efficient hands. She looked at Victor Caldero, at the absolute certainty in his expression. She looked at the wedding dress that suddenly felt like a shroud, at the reflection in the mirror of a bride who would never walk down an aisle. I'll change, she said quietly, but this isn't over. Someone will look for me. My mother, my friends, Your mother will be told you've eloped with Marco and are honeymooning abroad, Victor interrupted. Your friends will be informed of the same. In 6 weeks, you'll send a postcard from Santorini describing the beautiful sunsets and your happy new life. Everyone will be relieved that you found your fairy tale ending, even if it didn't look quite like you'd planned. You've thought of everything. I always do. Svetlana unzipped the garment bag, revealing a simple black dress and flat shoes. Elena stared at them, at the death of the girl in white, at the birth of whatever she was about to become. Turn around, she said to Victor, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. I may not have a choice about going with you, but I'll be damned if I give you the satisfaction of watching me surrender what's left of my dignity. For a moment, she thought he might refuse. Then, to her surprise, Victor turned his back, giving her the privacy he'd already stolen in every other way. Elena let Svetlana help her out of the wedding dress, let the silk and lace pool at her feet like the corpse of a dream. She stepped into the black dress, into the flat shoes, into a new life she'd never asked for and didn't want. I'm ready, she said. Victor turned. His eyes swept over her, assessing, calculating. You'll need a coat. It's cold where we're going. Svetlana produced a long black coat from the garment bag. Elena put it on, feeling it settle over her shoulders like a prison sentence. Before we go, Victor said, reaching into his pocket again. One more thing. He pulled out a phone, not the one he'd used before, but a new one, still in its box. He opened it, powered it on, and handed it to Elena. Your old life ends the moment you leave this room, he said. This phone contains exactly one contact, mine. If you need anything, if you're in danger, if you simply want to talk, you call that number, no one else. No attempts to reach your mother, your friends, or the authorities. Do you understand? Elena took the phone, its weight both insignificant and crushing. And if I refuse? Then the first call I make on my phone will be to your mother's apartment. The second will be to your cousin Sophia's car. The third will be to your brother's construction site. I will remind them all that debts from the father pass to the children, and that 20 years of interest on $12 million is a considerable sum. Victor's voice was utterly flat. I am giving you a choice, Elena. Take responsibility for this situation yourself, or watch everyone you love pay the price for your father's sins. The threat was clear, the trap complete. Elena looked at the phone in her hand, at the single contact that now represented her entire world. I understand, she whispered. Good. Victor moved to the door, gesturing for her to follow. Then let's go. We have a long drive ahead of us, and I'd prefer to avoid traffic. Elena followed him into the hallway, Svetlana close behind her. They walked past the room where her bouquet lay forgotten, past the suite where her mother was probably adjusting her dress and checking her makeup one last time, past the elevator that would have taken her down to the ballroom where Marco should have been waiting. Instead, they took the service stairs, descending into the bowels of the hotel where staff moved like ghosts and no one asked questions. A black car waited in the loading area, engine running, windows tinted so dark they looked like portals to nowhere. Elena climbed into the back seat. Victor slid in beside her. Svetlana took the front passenger seat, and the driver, a massive man who didn't even glance back, pulled smoothly into traffic. Through the dark window, Elena watched the Grand Meridian Hotel disappear behind them. Somewhere inside, 200 people were learning that there would be no wedding today. Somewhere in the world, Marco Santini was boarding a plane to a new life. And somewhere in her chest, Elena felt something crack and then harden, transforming from hope into something colder, sharper, more dangerous. She didn't know where they were taking her. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if she would ever see her mother again, or her friends, or the little studio apartment with terrible water pressure that had been the only space in the world that was truly hers. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The girl who'd put on a wedding dress this morning was gone. And whoever she became in the darkness ahead would be someone Victor Caldero hadn't planned for. Someone who would survive. Someone who would remember. And someday, someone who would make every single person who'd destroyed her fairy tale pay for what they'd taken. The car drove on through the city, carrying Elena toward a future she couldn't imagine and a past she'd never escape. Behind her, the ruins of her wedding burned. Ahead of her, the mouth of the wolf yawned wide. And inside her, small and fierce and unbreakable, the first spark of something like rage began to glow. Elena spent the rest of the morning pacing her room like a caged animal, examining every corner for weaknesses she knew she wouldn't find. The windows were sealed shut, reinforced glass that wouldn't break even if she threw the bedside lamp at it. Not that she tried, but the thought crossed her mind more than once. The door was solid wood with a lock that clicked with the finality of a prison cell. Even the bathroom offered no escape route, just a small frosted window too narrow for anyone larger than a child to squeeze through. By noon, she'd exhausted her exploration and collapsed back onto the bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to organize the chaos in her mind. Her father was alive. Marco had betrayed her. Victor Caldero believed she could help him recover stolen money she'd never known existed. And somewhere in all of this, there was supposed to be a version of events that made sense. The lock clicked. Elena sat up as Margaret entered carrying fresh towels and what looked like a garment bag. "Thought you might want these," the older woman said, laying the towels on a chair and hanging the bag in the closet. "Mr. Caldero mentioned you're welcome at dinner tonight if you choose to attend. Something appropriate to wear, just in case." Elena watched her move around the room with practiced efficiency, straightening things that didn't need straightening, creating the illusion of normalcy in a profoundly abnormal situation. "How long have you worked for him?" Elena asked. 15 years, as I said." Margaret smoothed the bedspread, even though Elena had barely disturbed it. "Since my husband passed and I needed employment." "And it doesn't bother you, what he does?" Margaret's hand stilled. She looked at Elena with eyes that had seen too much to be shocked by honest questions. "Mr. Caldero pays fair wages, provides health insurance, and makes sure my grandchildren have what they need for school. He's never raised his voice to me, never threatened me, never made me feel unsafe in his home." She resumed her work. "Whatever he does outside these walls is his business. What he does inside them has always been decent. He kidnapped me. He removed you from a dangerous situation created by a man who claimed to love you." Margaret's tone was gentle but firm. "I've seen women come through here before, Miss Rossi. Women running from husbands who beat them, from men who sold them like property, from situations that would have killed them if Mr. Caldero hadn't intervened. You may not like his methods, but you're alive and unharmed. That counts for something." Elena wanted to argue, to insist that being kidnapped from her own wedding was nothing like being rescued. But Margaret's expression held a certainty that came from experience, and Elena was beginning to understand that the world Victor Caldero inhabited operated by rules she didn't yet comprehend. "Will you tell me about dinner?" Elena asked instead. "Who will be there?" "Key members of the organization, as Mr. Caldero mentioned. Perhaps a dozen people, maybe fewer. They meet monthly to discuss business, resolve disputes, plan for the future." Margaret moved toward the door. "It's actually quite civil. No violence, no dramatics, just professionals handling professional matters. And I'm supposed to sit there while they discuss their criminal activities? You're supposed to eat a nice meal and decide whether you'd rather be part of this household or locked away from it." Margaret paused at the threshold. "Your choice, dear, but isolation rarely makes situations better." She left, the lock clicking into place once again. Elena sat in silence, weighing her options. Stay in this room and maintain her defiance, or attend dinner and learn what she could about the people holding her captive. Pride demanded she refuse, but survival instincts whispered that information was power, and right now she had almost none. She thought about what Victor had said, that she could be his ally or his prisoner. The distinction felt meaningless when she had no freedom either way, but perhaps there were degrees of imprisonment. Perhaps cooperation, even false cooperation, could buy her the trust she'd need to eventually escape. The afternoon crawled by. Elena tried the phone Victor had given her, but as promised, it contained only one contact. She stared at his name on the screen for a long time, thumb hovering over the call button before setting it aside. What would she even say? Please let me go? I'll do whatever you want? Both felt like surrender, and she wasn't ready for that yet. At 6 o'clock, Margaret returned with a simple meal: soup, bread, salad. Elena ate mechanically, tasting nothing, her mind elsewhere. By 7, she'd made her decision. She would attend dinner. She would observe, listen, and learn. She would start building the map of her prison so that eventually she could find a way out. The garment bag contained a dress in deep emerald green, simple but elegant, with long sleeves and a hem that fell just below the knee. Modest enough to be respectful, beautiful enough to be noticed. Elena put it on, feeling the soft fabric settle against her skin like armor. She left her hair down, a small rebellion against the elaborate styling of her wedding day. No makeup except what was absolutely necessary. She would attend Victor's dinner, but she wouldn't perform for him. At 7:30, the lock clicked and the door opened. Svetlana stood in the hallway, her expression as unreadable as ever. "Mr. Caldero requests your presence," she said in her flat accent. "And if I refuse?" "Then you eat here alone." Svetlana's lips curved slightly. "But you are already dressed. Seems wasteful to refuse now." Elena followed her down the corridor and back toward the main staircase. As they descended, she could hear voices from somewhere below. Conversation, laughter, the clink of glasses. Normal sounds from an utterly abnormal gathering. Svetlana led her to a dining room that could have been featured in an architecture magazine. Long table of dark wood, high-backed chairs, chandeliers that cast warm light over everything. Windows along one wall looked out over the darkened gardens, and a fireplace on the opposite wall crackled with real flames. The table was set for 14 with china and crystal that probably cost more than Elena made in a year. 8 people were already present, standing in small groups with drinks in hand. They turned as Elena entered, and she felt the weight of their collective assessment like a physical thing. These were Victor's people, his trusted circle, his inner court. Men and women who'd chosen to build their lives around a crime lord and somehow made peace with that choice. Victor stood near the fireplace in conversation with 2 older men. He looked up as Elena entered, something flickering across his face too quickly to identify. Approval, maybe. Or satisfaction that she'd accepted his implicit challenge. "Gentlemen, excuse me." He crossed the room with fluid grace, extending his hand toward Elena in a gesture that looked welcoming but felt like a claim of ownership. "Elena, I'm glad you decided to join us." She ignored his hand. "I was told I had a choice. I chose to eat somewhere other than a locked room." Practical. His smile was slight, acknowledging the small rebellion. "Let me introduce you to everyone. This is a unique opportunity. Most people never see this side of my organization." "Lucky me." Victor either didn't notice or chose to ignore her sarcasm. He guided her toward the first group with a hand that hovered near her lower back without quite touching. "Marcus, David, this is Elena Rossi. Elena, Marcus handles our legal affairs and David oversees logistics." Both men were in their 50s, well-dressed, utterly ordinary, except for the way they looked at her. Not with attraction or curiosity, but with calculation, as if trying to determine what value she represented. "Miss Rossi," Marcus extended his hand, which Elena shook briefly. "We've heard about your situation. Please accept my sympathies regarding your wedding." "My kidnapping, you mean?" David's eyebrows rose slightly. Marcus simply smiled. "A matter of perspective, I suppose." "Is it?" Elena's voice was sharp. "From my perspective, I was taken from my own wedding and brought here against my will. What perspective makes that acceptable?" The perspective that values your life over your convenience. Victor's tone was mild, but there was steel underneath. Marcus David will continue our discussion later. He steered Elena toward the next group before she could respond. A woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and sharper cheekbones examined Elena like a specimen under glass. Catherine runs our community outreach programs, Victor said. Food banks, job training, youth centers, anything that keeps the neighborhood stable and the people loyal. Elena blinked. Community outreach? You're a criminal organization. Catherine's smile was thin. We're a business that operates in areas conventional businesses ignore. Someone has to feed the hungry and employ the desperate. Might as well be us. How noble. It's practical, not noble. Catherine's gaze was steady. People who are fed and employed don't cause problems. They don't steal, don't riot, don't attract police attention. Our community programs are as much about maintaining order as helping people. So you do good things for selfish reasons. We do necessary things for sustainable reasons. Catherine tilted her head slightly. Tell me, Miss Rossi, when you were working at Gianni's and barely making rent, did you care whether your tips came from good people or bad people? Did you refuse money from customers you suspected of doing questionable things? Elena's jaw tightened. That's different. Is it? We all survive in the gray areas between right and wrong. I'm simply more honest about it than most. Victor moved her along before Elena could formulate a response. He introduced her to more people. A woman named Nina, who managed personnel, a man named Thomas, who oversaw security, others whose names and functions blurred together. Each one treated her with professional courtesy that felt rehearsed, as if they'd been briefed on how to handle Victor's newest acquisition. By the time they'd made the full circuit, Elena's head was spinning. These weren't the brutal thugs she'd expected. They were educated, articulate, frighteningly normal. They discussed their criminal enterprise with the casual professionalism of corporate executives, as if smuggling and extortion were just business strategies to be optimized. Please, everyone, be seated, Victor gestured toward the table. Elena, you'll sit here. The indicated chair was to Victor's right, a position of honor that felt like being on display. Elena considered refusing, claiming the far end of the table instead, but Svetlana had already appeared to pull out the chair, and every eye in the room was watching to see what she'd do. She sat. Victor took his place at the head of the table, and the others settled into what were clearly established positions. Staff appeared from a side door, Margaret and two younger women, carrying the first course. White plates, delicate portions, food that looked like art. Before we begin, Victor said, his voice cutting through the low conversation, I want to address the situation with Marco Santini. The room went quiet. Elena felt every gaze shift toward her, assessing, measuring. Most of you know that Marco attempted to steal from this organization and use Elena as leverage for his escape. This attempt failed, obviously, but it reveals a concerning pattern. Victor's tone was conversational, almost pleasant. We've become complacent. We've allowed people like Marco to believe they can take from us without consequence. That ends now. Have you located him? Marcus asked. Not yet. He's using resources we didn't know he'd acquired, which suggests planning that predates our discovery of his theft. Victor cut into his food with precise movements. But he'll surface eventually. They always do. In the meantime, we're implementing new security protocols and conducting a comprehensive audit of all accounts. And Miss Rossi's role in all this? Catherine's question was direct, her gaze on Elena unwavering. Elena is a victim of Marco's manipulation and a potential asset in recovering what was stolen. Victor's answer was smooth, practiced. She'll be staying with us until the situation is resolved. Staying, Elena said quietly, the word bitter in her mouth. Such a polite way to say imprisoned. Thomas, the security chief, leaned forward. You're safer here than anywhere else, Miss Rossi. Marco exposed you to multiple hostile parties. If we release you, you're dead within days. So everyone keeps telling me. Funny how my safety requires me to be locked in a room. The lock is temporary, Victor said. Once everyone understands you're under my protection, you'll have more freedom to move around the estate. The estate I can't leave. Well, yes, that part is non-negotiable. Elena set down her fork with deliberate care. And how long is temporary? Days? Weeks? Years? Until your father contacts you or Marco resurfaces, whichever comes first. My father has been gone for 20 years. What makes you think he'll contact me now? Victor's expression was unreadable. Because you've disappeared from your own wedding and seemingly eloped with a man who betrayed me. Your father will be worried. Worried people make mistakes. Elena's stomach turned. She was bait, just as she'd understood from the beginning, but hearing it confirmed so casually in front of all these people made it feel more real and more hopeless. I won't help you hurt my father, she said, proud that her voice remained steady. I'm not asking you to hurt anyone. I'm asking you to facilitate a conversation when he inevitably reaches out. And if he doesn't, then we wait. The meal continued, conversation shifting to business matters that meant nothing to Elena. Shipments and territories, disputes and resolutions, the mundane logistics of running a criminal empire. She ate because the food was in front of her, and refusing it would only draw more attention. She listened because information was power, even if she didn't yet understand how to use it. Between courses, Nina leaned toward her. This must be overwhelming. That's one word for it. For what it's worth, you're handling it well. Most people fall apart their first few days here. Most people? Elena turned to look at her. How many others has Victor kidnapped? Nina's smile was slight. Kidnapped is such a harsh word. Let's say relocated for their own protection. Let's not. Fair enough. Nina took a sip of wine. But truly you are safer here. I know it doesn't feel that way now, but Victor doesn't make empty threats. If he says people are looking for you, they are. If he says you'd be dead if he released you, you would be. And that's supposed to make me grateful? It's supposed to make you realistic about your options. Nina's gaze was steady. Victor is many things, but he's not cruel without reason. If you cooperate, if you help resolve this situation, you'll walk away from this intact, maybe even better off than you were before. Better off than being abandoned at my wedding and kidnapped by a crime lord? The bar is pretty low. The bar for most people's lives is lower than you'd think. Elena had no response to that. She turned back to her food, isolating herself from the conversation flowing around her. These people had accepted their places in Victor's world, had rationalized their choices until crime felt like just another career path. She wouldn't become like them, couldn't become like them. But as the meal progressed and the conversation continued, Elena found herself listening despite her resistance. Victor spoke about protecting neighborhoods the police ignored, about providing jobs to people conventional employers wouldn't hire, about maintaining order in chaos. His people discussed their work with genuine pride, as if they were building something meaningful rather than profiting from others' desperation. It was seductive, this narrative. The idea that crime could be righteous, that violence could serve justice, that the ends justified the means. Elena could see how people got pulled into this world, how they convinced themselves they were heroes rather than villains. She could also see how dangerous that seduction was. Tell me, Elena, Victor said during a lull in conversation, his attention suddenly focused entirely on her. What did you think you were getting when you agreed to marry Marco? The question was unexpected, too personal for the setting. Elena felt the rest of the table go quiet, waiting for her answer. I don't see how that's relevant. Humor me. Elena set down her wine glass. I thought I was getting a partner. Someone who saw me when most of the world looked right through me. Someone who made me feel valuable. And now? Now I know I was getting a liar who saw an opportunity and took it. Does that make you angry? Of course it makes me angry. It makes me furious and humiliated and… Elena stopped, realizing she was giving him exactly what he wanted. Emotional honesty that revealed her vulnerabilities. Why are you asking me this? Because I'm trying to understand who you are underneath the fear and defiance. Victor's gaze was intense. You're not what I expected, Elena Rossi. Most people in your situation would still be crying or screaming or begging to go home. But you're sitting here having dinner with criminals, holding your own in conversations, refusing to break. That interests me. I'm not here for your interest. No, you're here because circumstances beyond your control have placed you in an impossible situation. But how you respond to those circumstances, that's entirely within your control. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, I have no control over anything. You have more than you think. Victor leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. You could have refused to come to dinner. You could be locked in your room right now, alone and miserable. Instead, you're here, learning about my organization, meeting my people, beginning to understand how things work. That was a choice. A choice between isolation and observation, not exactly a wealth of options. All choices exist within constraints. The question is whether you let those constraints define you or whether you find ways to work within them. Elena wanted to throw her wine in his face, wanted to tell him that philosophy was easy when you were the one imposing the constraints. But she was surrounded by his people, in his house, entirely at his mercy. Rebellion would be satisfying for about 30 seconds and then make everything worse. I'm still not going to help you hurt my father, she said instead, and I'm still not asking you to. Victor's smile was slight. I'm asking you to help me have a conversation with him. What happens during that conversation will depend on your father's choices, not yours. That's a convenient way to absolve yourself of responsibility. That's the truth. I can't control what your father does any more than I can control what you do. I can only control my own responses to those actions. The meal concluded with dessert and coffee. People began to drift away, some heading to another room for drinks, others making their excuses and leaving entirely. Elena sat frozen in her chair, exhausted from the effort of maintaining her composure for so long. Walk with me, Victor said, standing and extending his hand. Elena ignored the hand but stood. Where? The gardens. You've been locked inside all day. Fresh air will do you good. She wanted to refuse, but the thought of being outside, even under guard, even in darkness, was too tempting. She followed him through French doors that opened onto a stone terrace. The night air was cold and sharp, smelling of pine and earth. Solar lights illuminated paths winding through elaborate gardens that must be stunning in daylight. They walked in silence for several minutes, Svetlana trailing at a discreet distance. Elena wrapped her arms around herself against the cold, refusing Victor's offer of his jacket. The small rebellion felt important even though it meant she was freezing. You did well tonight, Victor said eventually. I sat through dinner with criminals. Forgive me if I don't consider that an accomplishment. You held your own in difficult conversations. You didn't break, didn't retreat, didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing you afraid. He paused on a bridge spanning a small pond, moonlight reflecting off the dark water. That takes strength. Or stupidity. Sometimes they're the same thing. Victor turned to face her, his expression serious in the dim light. I meant what I said earlier. You're not what I expected. Most people in your situation would still be in denial about their circumstances. But you've already accepted reality and started strategizing. That's rare. What do you want me to say? Thank you for noticing how well I'm handling my own kidnapping? I want you to understand that you have options here, Elena. You can be my enemy if that makes you feel better, or you can be my ally if that serves you better. But either way, you're going to be here for a while. The question is whether that time is miserable or merely difficult. Elena stared at him. This man who spoke about choices while denying her the most fundamental one, the freedom to leave. You're asking me to give up on my own rescue, to accept this as my new reality and make the best of it. I'm asking you to be practical. And if I refuse, if I keep fighting, keep looking for ways to escape? Victor's expression didn't change, but something cold flashed in his eyes. Then you'll waste energy you could be using to actually improve your situation. You'll make enemies of people who could be allies, and you'll still be here, but more isolated and more vulnerable than you are now. That sounds like a threat. It's an observation based on experience. He resumed walking, and Elena followed because standing alone in the dark felt worse than staying with her captor. I've seen people break themselves against impossible situations, refusing to adapt because they thought flexibility was surrender. They accomplished nothing except their own destruction. And I should just adapt to being imprisoned? You should recognize the difference between the battles you can win and the ones you can't. Fighting me is futile. I have too many resources, too many people, too much power. But working within this situation to protect yourself and potentially your father, that's achievable. They'd circled back toward the house. Elena could see warm light spilling from the windows, hear distant laughter from wherever Victor's people had gathered. It looked welcoming, looked safe, the perfect trap. I need you to understand something, Elena said, stopping before they reached the terrace. No matter how long you keep me here, no matter how comfortable you try to make it, no matter how many philosophical conversations we have about choices and constraints, I will never forgive you for this. I will never be grateful. I will never see you as anything other than the man who destroyed my life. Victor studied her for a long moment, and Elena thought she saw something like regret cross his face. But it was gone too quickly to be certain, replaced by his usual controlled neutrality. I can accept that, he said finally, as long as you understand that my goal isn't your gratitude. It's the resolution of a business problem that unfortunately involves you. How you feel about me is irrelevant to that objective. Then we understand each other. We do. They walked back inside in silence. Svetlana materialized to escort Elena back to her room, and Elena went without protest, too exhausted for further rebellion. The lock clicked behind her with familiar finality. Elena changed into pajamas and climbed into bed, her mind replaying the evening's conversations. Victor's people weren't monsters. They were pragmatists who'd found ways to rationalize their choices, to build meaning in morally complicated spaces. That made them more dangerous than simple thugs, because their justifications were sophisticated enough to be almost convincing. Almost. Elena closed her eyes and thought about her mother, who by now must have received the fake message about the elopement. She thought about her father, alive somewhere in the world, unaware that his daughter had become collateral for crimes committed 20 years ago. She thought about Marco, who was probably sipping drinks on a beach somewhere, congratulating himself on his successful escape. And she thought about herself, about the girl who'd put on a wedding dress this morning, believing in fairy tales, and the woman she was becoming in the ruins of those beliefs. Tomorrow she would give Victor her answer. She would agree to help him contact her father, not because she wanted to, not because she forgave him, but because cooperation was the only path toward freedom she could see. But she would also start planning, learning the routines of the house, the patterns of the guards, the weaknesses in the system. Information gathering that looked like acceptance but was actually reconnaissance. Victor thought he'd bought her compliance with threats and philosophy. He thought he understood her because he'd observed her for a few weeks and cataloged her habits. He had no idea what she was capable of when pushed into a corner. Elena smiled in the darkness, the expression sharp and cold and utterly unlike the sweet waitress who'd believed in love stories. That girl was dead, killed somewhere between the bridal suite and this beautiful prison. What rose from her ashes would be something Victor Caldero hadn't planned for, something that would burn his carefully constructed world to the ground, if that's what freedom required. Morning came too early, pale winter sunlight filtering through the curtains and painting the room in shades of gray. Elena woke with her decision already made, the clarity that came from a sleepless night spent weighing impossible choices. She would cooperate with Victor, not because she trusted him, not because she believed his promises, but because rebellion without resources was just another word for suicide. Margaret arrived with breakfast at 8, her cheerful demeanor unchanged despite the circumstances. Elena ate in silence, barely tasting the eggs and toast, her mind already moving through the conversations ahead. When the door opened again an hour later, she was dressed and waiting, her posture straight and her expression carefully neutral. Victor entered alone this time, no Svetlana, no guards. He wore jeans and a simple black sweater, looking more like a college professor than a crime lord. The casual appearance was probably calculated, designed to put her at ease. It didn't work. "You have an answer for me," he said. Not a question. "I'll help you contact my father." Elena's voice was steady, betraying none of the turmoil beneath. "But I have conditions." Victor's eyebrows rose slightly. "You're not in a position to negotiate. Then you're not in a position to get my genuine cooperation. You can force me to make a phone call if my father contacts me, but you can't force me to say the right things, to ask the right questions, to convince him to trust whatever meeting you arrange." Elena met his gaze directly. "You need me to be believable. That requires willing participation, not coerced performance." A smile ghosted across Victor's lips, there and gone. "What are your conditions?" "First, the lock comes off my door. You said it was temporary once people understood I was under your protection. Make them understand. Done. What else? I want access to the estate. Not freedom to leave, I understand that's not negotiable. But I won't be confined to one room like a pet. Reasonable. Continue. Elena had spent hours refining this list, anticipating his responses, preparing her arguments. I want regular phone calls with my mother, supervised if you insist, scripted if necessary, but real contact. She's been through enough in her life. I won't let her think I've abandoned her the way my father did. Victor was quiet for a moment, considering. Once a week, 15 minutes, monitored. You'll tell her you're traveling, that Marco is treating you well, that you're happy. Nothing that suggests distress or coercion. Once a week isn't enough. It's what you're getting. Your mother will become suspicious if you suddenly start calling daily when you rarely called more than twice a week before. We maintain the illusion of normalcy, or we don't call at all. Elena's jaw tightened, but she nodded. It was better than nothing. I want my own laptop, internet access, even if it's monitored. No. But Victor's response was immediate and final. The risk of you signaling for help or leaving digital breadcrumbs is too high. You can have books, magazines, television, anything that doesn't involve outbound communication. Then I want something to do. I'm not going to sit in a room for weeks or months waiting for my father to magically appear. Give me work. Give me purpose. Give me something other than my own thoughts. Victor studied her with that unsettling intensity, as if he could read the calculations happening behind her eyes. What kind of work? I was a waitress. Before that, I worked in a bakery. I can cook, I can serve, I can organize. Elena kept her voice level. You must have kitchens here, staff who prepare meals. Let me help. Let me earn my place instead of just occupying space. You want to work in my kitchen? I want to feel useful. There's a difference between being imprisoned and being helpless. You're not giving me freedom, but maybe you can give me agency within these constraints. The words echoed his own philosophy from the night before, and she saw recognition flicker in his expression. He understood what she was doing, taking his argument and turning it back on him, demanding he live up to his own stated principles. You'll work under Margaret's supervision, he said finally. You'll follow her instructions exactly. You'll interact professionally with staff and keep personal information to yourself. Any attempt to recruit allies or plan an escape will result in immediate return to a locked room. Clear? Crystal. Then we have an agreement. Victor moved toward the door, then paused. Elena understands something. I'm giving you freedom within limits because I believe you're intelligent enough to recognize those limits are real. Don't make me regret trusting your judgment. You're not trusting me. You're gambling that the illusion of freedom will make me more compliant than actual imprisonment, but I'll take the gamble because it's better than nothing. At least you're honest about it. He opened the door and left it standing open, a symbolic gesture that would have been meaningful if there weren't still guards in the hallway. The lock has been removed. Margaret will show you to the kitchens when you're ready. He left, and for the first time since arriving at Blackthorn, Elena walked out of her room without an escort. The freedom was minimal, hedged with restrictions and surveillance, but it felt monumental anyway. She could move, could breathe, could exist somewhere other than those four walls. She found Margaret in a large kitchen that would have made any restaurant envious. Commercial appliances, marble countertops, copper pots hanging from ceiling racks. Windows overlooked the gardens, flooding the space with natural light. Two younger women worked at different stations, one chopping vegetables, the other kneading dough. Miss Rossi, Margaret said, looking up from a clipboard. Mr. Caldero said you'd be joining us. This is Anna and Sophia. Ladies, Elena will be helping in the kitchen going forward. The two women offered polite nods but little warmth. Elena didn't blame them. She was the boss's prisoner, an unknown element in their carefully structured world. Trust would have to be earned, assuming it could be earned at all. What do you need me to do? Elena asked. Margaret assessed her with a practiced eye. Can you actually cook, or were you exaggerating to get out of your room? I worked at Gianni's for 3 years. Before that, Luna's Bakery. I can handle prep work, basic cooking, plating, nothing fancy but functional. Functional works, Margaret gestured toward the vegetables. We're preparing lunch for 20. Help Anna with the chopping. Dinner is for 40. Mr. Caldero is hosting a larger gathering. We'll need all hands for that. Elena washed her hands and joined Anna at the counter. The rhythmic work of chopping carrots and celery was meditative, her hands remembering skills she'd learned years ago. Anna worked silently beside her, occasionally glancing over but saying nothing. The distance was fine. Elena wasn't looking for friends. As the morning progressed, Elena fell into the rhythm of kitchen work. The familiar motions, the controlled chaos, the satisfaction of creating something tangible. It all felt grounding after days of disorientation. She moved between stations as Margaret directed, learning the layout, understanding the hierarchy, observing the patterns. She also started cataloging information. The kitchen had 3 exits: the main entrance to the dining room, a side door to the gardens, and a service entrance that connected to what looked like storage areas. Guards passed by the garden door regularly, maybe every 20 minutes. The service entrance seemed less monitored, but it probably led deeper into the estate rather than toward freedom. "You're watching the exits," Margaret said quietly, appearing beside Elena as she stirred a pot of soup. "Not subtle enough, dear." Elena didn't bother denying it. "Can you blame me?" "No. But I can warn you that running would be foolish. The estate is surrounded by forest for miles, the roads are monitored, and the nearest town is too far to reach on foot before someone noticed you were missing." Margaret's voice was kind but firm. "You'd be found within hours and lose all the privileges you just negotiated." "Then why tell me this? Why not let me try and fail?" "Because I like you." Margaret squeezed her shoulder briefly. "You remind me of my daughter, stubborn, proud, unwilling to accept unfairness without a fight. But my daughter also knew when to choose her battles wisely. Learned that lesson faster than she did." Before Elena could ask what happened to Margaret's daughter, the older woman had moved away to check on Sophia's bread. The moment passed, but the warning lingered. Lunch service went smoothly. Elena helped plate and serve, carrying dishes to a smaller dining room where a dozen of Victor's people ate while discussing business. She kept her head down, her expression neutral, playing the role of invisible servant. Several people from the previous night's dinner were present, but none acknowledged her beyond basic courtesy. Victor himself didn't appear until the meal was nearly finished. He entered through a side door, still on his phone, speaking rapid Italian to whoever was on the other end. His eyes found Elena immediately, tracked her movement from the kitchen to the table and back, but he gave no indication of recognition beyond a slight nod. Elena told herself she didn't care whether he noticed her or not, told herself his opinion was irrelevant, his approval meaningless. But some small, traitorous part of her registered that nod, filed it away as acknowledgement that she was keeping her end of their bargain. The afternoon was consumed by preparation for dinner. Elena lost track of time in the familiar dance of cooking, the careful choreography of a kitchen operating at full capacity. Margaret assigned her to work with Anna on salads and side dishes, while Sophia handled the main courses. The work was demanding enough to quiet Elena's thoughts, physical enough to exhaust the restless energy that had been building since her kidnapping. "You're good at this," Anna said eventually, the first words she'd spoken directly to Elena all day. "Margaret said you worked at restaurants before." "Yeah, it was supposed to be temporary just until I figured out what I really wanted to do." Elena's laugh was bitter. "Guess I never figured it out." "Most people don't. We just keep moving until we run out of road." Anna's accent suggested Eastern European roots, though less pronounced than Svetlana's. "You get used to it here. The work, the routine. It's not freedom, but it's not prison either." "What is it then?" Anna was quiet for a moment, her knife moving with practiced efficiency through a pile of radishes. "It's survival, same as anywhere else, just with different rules." Elena wanted to ask how Anna had ended up here, what circumstances had brought her to work in a crime lord's kitchen, whether she'd come willingly or been forced. But the walls had ears in a place like this, and trust was dangerous. So she just nodded and returned to her work. Dinner was an elaborate affair. 40 people filled the main dining room, the table extended to its full length and set with the same expensive china as the night before. Elena worked service alongside Margaret and Anna, moving efficiently between kitchen and dining room, refilling wine glasses and clearing plates, and trying not to listen to conversations about territory disputes and shipping schedules. Victor held court at the head of the table, managing his people with the skill of a conductor leading an orchestra. He spoke little but listened intently, intervening only when discussions grew too heated or strayed too far from productive. Elena watched him work and understood why people followed him, not just from fear, but from respect for his competence, his control, his ability to make difficult decisions without visible doubt. It was easier when she could think of him as simply evil, as a cartoon villain who kidnapped innocent women. Harder when she saw him like this, solving real problems for real people who depended on him. The cognitive dissonance was exhausting. She was carrying a tray of dessert plates back to the kitchen when a hand caught her elbow. Elena turned to find Catherine, the woman who ran community outreach, studying her with sharp eyes. "You're adapting," Catherine observed. "Most people in your position would still be crying or planning dramatic escape attempts." "Maybe I'm just good at hiding it." "Maybe. Or maybe you're smarter than Victor gives you credit for." Catherine released Elena's arm. "Either way, you should know that half the people in this room think you're a spy sent by our enemies. The other half think you're leverage that's more trouble than you're worth. Very few believe Victor's story about Marco's betrayal." Elena's stomach tightened. "What do you believe?" "I believe you're exactly what you appear to be, collateral damage in someone else's war." Catherine's expression was unreadable. "The question is whether you'll let that define you, or whether you'll find ways to write your own story within these constraints." Everyone keeps talking about choices and constraints like I have real agency here. I don't. Victor holds all the power. Victor holds structural power. You hold narrative power. Catherine glanced toward the dining room where Victor was deep in conversation with Marcus. You can be the victim he kidnapped, or you can be the woman who made the best of an impossible situation. That choice shapes how people see you, which shapes how they treat you, which shapes what's actually possible for you here. You're telling me to perform victimhood or strength. I'm telling you that perception is reality in places like this. Choose wisely which version of yourself you want people to believe. Catherine smiled slightly. Now finish your work before Margaret notices you've been gone too long. Elena returned to the kitchen, her mind churning over the conversation. Catherine was right. She'd been so focused on the fact of her imprisonment that she'd ignored the possibilities within it. If she could convince Victor's people that she was intelligent, capable, trustworthy, maybe she could expand her freedom incrementally. Maybe she could build enough trust to eventually find a real opportunity for escape. It was a long game, one that required patience she wasn't sure she possessed. But what alternative did she have? The dinner finally ended near midnight. Elena helped clean the kitchen alongside Anna and Sophia, scrubbing dishes and storing leftovers in the massive refrigerator. Her feet ached, her back was sore, and she was more exhausted than she'd been in months. But it was honest exhaustion, earned through work rather than emotional turmoil. "You did well today," Margaret said as Elena hung up her apron. "Same time tomorrow?" "Do I have a choice?" "There's always a choice, dear. The question is whether the alternatives are better or worse." Margaret's smile was knowing. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be just as demanding." Elena walked back to her room alone, no guards, no Svetlana. The freedom was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. She could theoretically walk out the front door, try to run, test how serious Victor's warnings were. But Catherine's words echoed in her mind. Half the people here thought she was a spy. The other half thought she was trouble. Running now would only confirm she was both. Her room looked the same as she'd left it that morning, but the absence of the lock changed everything. The door was just a door now, not a cage. A small distinction that felt enormous. Elena showered and changed into pajamas, her body finally beginning to relax. She was climbing into bed when someone knocked. Her first instinct was to call out for them to go away, but curiosity won. Victor stood in the hallway, still dressed from dinner, looking as exhausted as she felt. "I wanted to see how your first day went," he said. "You were at dinner. You saw." "I saw you working. I didn't see how you were handling it." He leaned against the doorframe, making no move to enter. "Margaret said you did well, that you worked hard and didn't cause problems." "Is this where you congratulate me on being a good prisoner? This is where I acknowledge that you kept your word. You could have used kitchen access to cause chaos or try to escape. You didn't. That matters." Elena wanted to stay angry, to maintain the emotional distance that felt like her only protection. But she was too tired for performance, too worn down by the day to maintain her defenses. "I'm trying to survive," she said quietly. That's all this is. Not cooperation, not acceptance, just survival. I know, but survival is still something. Victor was quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, I meant what I said about giving you agency within the constraints. You'll have more freedom as you prove you won't abuse it. How generous of you to give me slightly less imprisonment. It's the best I can offer given the circumstances. The circumstances you created. The circumstances Marco created by stealing from me and using you as leverage. I'm simply managing the fallout. Victor straightened. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be easier now that you understand the routine. He left before Elena could formulate a response. She closed the door, her choice, not his, and stood in the quiet room trying to process the strange conversation. Victor was checking on her like she mattered beyond her utility. It was probably manipulation, another way to build trust that could be exploited. But it had felt genuine, and that was more dangerous than any obvious threat. Elena climbed into bed and stared at the ceiling, her mind refusing to settle despite her exhaustion. She'd survived her first full day in this new reality. She'd negotiated better conditions, earned a measure of freedom, started building relationships that might eventually prove useful. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. The phone Victor had given her sat on the nightstand, its single contact a reminder of how completely her world had narrowed. She picked it up, thumb hovering over his name, fighting the urge to call and demand answers to questions she wasn't ready to ask. What happened to the other people you've relocated for their protection? Did they eventually leave, or did they become permanent fixtures in your world? How many of them started out defiant like me and ended up rationalized like your staff? At what point does survival become complicity? She set the phone down without calling. Some questions were better left unasked, especially when she suspected she wouldn't like the answers. The next week fell into a rhythm that was simultaneously comforting and disturbing. Elena worked in the kitchen every day, learning the patterns of the estate, earning Margaret's trust and Anna's tentative friendship. She spoke with her mother on Sunday afternoon, a carefully scripted conversation about traveling through Europe and how wonderful Marco was treating her. Her mother's voice cracked with happiness, believing her daughter had finally found the fairy tale ending she deserved. Elena cried for an hour after that call. The crying became part of the routine too. Late at night, alone in her room, she let herself grieve for the life she'd lost, for the illusions she'd believed, for the future that would never materialize. Then morning would come, and she'd push the grief down deep, armor herself with competence and compliance, and return to the careful dance of surviving in a gilded cage. Victor appeared occasionally, sometimes at meals, sometimes in the kitchen to discuss menus with Margaret, sometimes in the gardens where Elena had started taking evening walks. They spoke rarely, brief exchanges that revealed nothing and everything. He was giving her space to adapt, letting her settle into the routine before pushing for whatever came next. Elena knew the push would come eventually. This careful détente was temporary, a grace period before Victor demanded she fulfill her end of their bargain. She used the time to observe, to learn, to slowly map the invisible boundaries of her prison. She learned that Svetlana was Victor's head of security, utterly loyal and utterly lethal. That Marcus the lawyer had a daughter at Stanford and traveled monthly to visit her. That Catherine's community programs were actually successful at reducing neighborhood violence, a fact that complicated Elena's attempts to see these people as simple villains. She learned that Thomas had been with Victor for 15 years, recruited after Victor saved his sister from an abusive relationship. That Nina processed more paperwork than seemed possible for one person, managing personnel files and payroll for an organization that officially didn't exist. That Margaret's daughter had died in a car accident 5 years ago, and that Victor had paid for the funeral and supported Margaret financially for months afterward. These people weren't monsters. They were complicated, morally gray, doing questionable things for reasons that felt justified to them. And the more Elena understood their stories, the harder it became to maintain her righteous anger. It was Sophia who finally broke through Elena's careful isolation. The younger woman approached her on Friday afternoon while they were preparing bread for the weekend. "You're not like the others," Sophia said in accented English, her hands working dough with practiced efficiency. "What others?" "The women Victor has brought here before. They were always crying, always begging, always trying to run." Sophia glanced at Elena. You're different, quieter, watching everything. Maybe I'm just better at hiding it. Maybe. Or maybe you understand something they didn't. Sophia shaped the dough into loaves with expert precision. This place, it's not what it seems. Victor, he's not what he seems. Everyone here has a story about how they ended up in his world. Most of those stories start with someone else being cruel, and Victor being less cruel by comparison. Is that your story? Sophia's hand stilled briefly. My story is that I came to America for a better life and found myself sold to men who treated women like property. Victor's people found me, bought my contract, and gave me actual employment instead of slavery. So yes, I work for a criminal, but I'm alive and free in ways I wouldn't be otherwise. Elena absorbed this, adding it to the growing collection of moral complications. Does that make what he does right? It makes what he does understandable. Right and wrong are luxuries for people who have choices. The rest of us just survive however we can. Sophia resumed working the dough. You'll figure that out eventually. Everyone does. That night, Elena lay in bed thinking about choices and survival, about the gradual erosion of principles in the face of practical realities. She'd been at Blackthorn for 10 days, and already she could feel herself softening, rationalizing, beginning to accept circumstances she'd sworn never to accept. The phone buzzed on her nightstand, the first time it had made any sound since Victor gave it to her. Elena grabbed it, heart racing, and saw a text message from the single contact. Your father tried to access the offshore account yesterday. He knows something is wrong. We need to talk. Elena stared at the message, her blood running cold. Her father was alive, aware, searching for answers about the money Marco had stolen in her name, which meant Victor's prediction was coming true. Antonio Rossi was breaking his careful silence because he was worried about his daughter. The trap was working, and Elena was the bait that would spring it. She typed and deleted a dozen responses before finally settling on something non-committal. When? The response came immediately. Tomorrow morning. My office. 9 o'clock. Elena set the phone down with shaking hands. Tomorrow, the grace period would end. Tomorrow, Victor would ask her to help capture her father. And tomorrow, Elena would have to decide whether survival justified betrayal, whether her freedom was worth her father's imprisonment. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine what she would say, how she would respond, what choice she would ultimately make. But the truth was, she'd already made it the moment she agreed to cooperate. Everything since then had just been delaying the inevitable. Sleep didn't come easily. When it finally did, Elena's dreams were full of locked doors and faceless men, of her father's voice calling from somewhere she couldn't reach, of Victor's gray eyes watching her with something that might have been pity or might have been satisfaction. She woke before dawn, exhausted and anxious, dreading the conversation ahead. But she got up anyway, showered and dressed with mechanical precision, armored herself with the appearance of calm she'd perfected over the past week. At 8:50, she stood outside Victor's office, hand raised to knock, future hanging in the balance. Whatever happened next would define not just what became of her father, but what became of Elena herself. Whether she remained the girl who believed in fairy tales or transformed into someone harder, colder, capable of surviving in a world where every choice carried impossible weight. She knocked. Victor's voice came through the heavy door, calm and measured. Come in. Elena entered an office that matched the rest of Blackthorn's aesthetic. Masculine elegance, dark wood, leather furniture that probably cost more than she'd earn in 5 years. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the gardens, morning light streaming across a massive desk covered in papers and computer monitors. Victor sat behind it, reading something on his tablet, and didn't look up immediately. The power play was obvious. Make her wait, make her feel small, establish dominance before the conversation even began. Elena refused to play along. She sat in one of the chairs facing his desk without being invited, crossed her legs, and waited with her own silence. Victor's lips quirked slightly as he set down the tablet. Good morning. You said my father tried to access the account. Tell me what happened. Direct. I appreciate that. Victor turned one of his monitors toward her. Yesterday at 3:15 p.m., someone attempted to log into the offshore account Marco used to frame you. The login failed. The account has been frozen since we discovered the theft, but the attempt triggered alerts we'd set up. Elena leaned forward to study the screen. It showed login attempts from an IP address she didn't recognize, time-stamped exactly as Victor said. Where was it from? A cyber cafe in Barcelona, the same city where Marco supposedly fled. Victor's expression was thoughtful. Interesting coincidence, don't you think? You think they're together, Marco and my father? I think it's possible Marco contacted your father after he ran, tried to warn him, or possibly recruit him as an ally against me. Your father would have questions about why his carefully hidden account suddenly emptied and his daughter disappeared from her own wedding. Victor pulled up another screen showing security camera footage. This was captured outside the cyber cafe 20 minutes before the login attempt. The image was grainy, taken from across the street, but Elena's breath caught anyway. A man in his 50s, average height, graying hair, wearing jeans and a jacket that had seen better days. He looked unremarkable, forgettable, exactly the kind of person who could disappear into any crowd. He also looked heartbreakingly familiar, though Elena couldn't say exactly why. She'd been 7 when he left. The man in the photograph was 2 decades older, weathered by time and whatever life he'd built in hiding. But something in the way he held himself, the set of his shoulders, the angle of his jaw, it echoed in her own mirror every morning. "That's him," she whispered. "That's my father." "We believe so. Facial recognition is 63% confident, which is low but not meaningless given how much he's aged and how few reference photos we have." Victor closed the image. "The question now is what we do with this information." Elena sat back, trying to organize thoughts that felt scattered and sharp. "You want me to contact him somehow, draw him out?" "Eventually, yes. But first, I want to understand something." Victor's gaze was intense. "Your father has been hiding successfully for 20 years. He's careful, paranoid, smart enough to avoid every trap I've set. But he's breaking cover now because he's worried about you. That kind of emotional vulnerability is exploitable, but only if we approach it correctly. You want to know if I care about him enough to help you." Elena's laugh was bitter. "I don't even know him. He left when I was a child. Everything I remember is probably fiction my mother told me to make his absence hurt less. Memory is unreliable, especially childhood memory, but biology is persistent." Victor leaned forward, elbows on his desk. "He's your father, Elena. Knowing he's alive, that he's been watching you from a distance, that he's worried enough to risk exposure, doesn't that mean something? It means he's human. It doesn't mean I owe him anything." "I'm not asking what you owe him. I'm asking what you want from this situation." Victor's voice softened. "You could meet him, have a conversation, get answers to questions you've probably carried for 20 years. Understand why he left, where he's been, whether he ever regretted abandoning you." The offer was seductive, and Elena hated how much she wanted it. "And in exchange for this touching reunion, I help you capture him." "I prefer the word negotiate. Your father stole from me. That debt needs to be addressed. But how it's addressed, whether through violence or conversation, punishment or restitution, that depends largely on his willingness to cooperate." Victor pulled out a folder and slid it across the desk. "This is what I'm proposing." Elena opened it to find a formal contract, dense with legal language she only partially understood. But the summary was clear enough. Antonio Rossi would return to work for Victor's organization, his salary garnished at 70% until the 12 million plus interest was repaid. Estimated timeline, 15 years, assuming he lived that long and stayed productive. "You want him to become your indentured servant. I want him to work off a debt he legitimately owes. If he'd stolen 12 million from a bank, he'd spend the rest of his life in prison. This way, he stays free, stays productive, and gets to have some kind of relationship with his family." Victor's expression was sincere. "It's more generous than he deserves. It's slavery with a salary. It's accountability with dignity. There's a difference." Elena read through the contract again, looking for loopholes or escape clauses. The terms were clear and brutal. Her father would essentially belong to Victor for the next decade and a half, with no possibility of early termination except through death or complete repayment. What if he refuses? Then I stop being generous and start being practical. I'll freeze every asset he has, alert every law enforcement agency that might care about his theft, and make it impossible for him to exist anywhere in the modern world. Victor's voice was a matter of fact. He can accept my terms or spend what's left of his life running from me and everyone else. His choice. And my role in this? You help me arrange a meeting. Neutral territory, plenty of witnesses, no weapons, no violence. You vouch for my intentions, convince him I'm serious about the contract rather than planning an execution. Victor paused. And then you decide whether you want to maintain a relationship with him going forward or cut ties forever. Elena closed the folder, her hands shaking slightly. You're asking me to sell my father into 15 years of servitude. I'm asking you to facilitate a conversation that gives him options instead of just consequences. What he does with those options is up to him. This is insane. You can't seriously expect me to... I expect you to be practical, just as you've been practical about everything else since arriving here. Victor's gaze didn't waver. You've adapted, Elena. You've found ways to survive in impossible circumstances. This is just another impossible circumstance requiring another adaptation. Adapting to imprisonment is different from betraying family. Is it? You're already lying to your mother every week, telling her you're happy and traveling and in love with a man who abandoned you. You're already working in my kitchen, serving my people, becoming part of my household. You've been betraying yourself in small ways every day. This is just a larger betrayal with potentially better outcomes. The words hit like physical blows because they were true. Elena had been compromising her principles incrementally since she arrived, each small surrender making the next one easier. Working in the kitchen wasn't collaboration, she'd told herself. Talking to Victor's people wasn't fraternization. Accepting her circumstances wasn't defeat. But it was. All of it was. And now Victor was asking her to take the final step, to cross the line from unwilling prisoner to active participant in his world. I need time to think about this, she said. You have until tomorrow. Your father is clearly monitoring the situation, probably through contacts in the city who can tell him if you resurface. Once he knows you're alive and with me, he'll try to make contact. When that happens, we need to be ready with a unified response. Unified? As if we're partners in this. We are partners, whether you like it or not. Your cooperation determines how this situation resolves. Choose wisely. Victor stood, signaling the meeting was over. Take the contract, read it thoroughly. If you have questions, ask Marcus. He wrote it and can explain the legal implications. But understand that this is the best offer your father will get. Probably the only offer that doesn't end with him dead or in prison. Elena took the folder and left without another word. She walked through the estate in a daze, barely seeing the familiar hallways and rooms. Her feet carried her to the gardens automatically, seeking fresh air and space to think. She found a bench hidden among winter-bare rose bushes and sat, the contract heavy in her lap. The morning was cold, her breath visible in the air, but she barely felt it. Her mind was too busy spinning through scenarios, consequences, possibilities. If she refused to help, Victor would pursue her father anyway. He had the resources, the connections, the sheer ruthless determination to hunt Antonio Rossi down eventually. And without Elena's cooperation, without the illusion of family reconciliation, Victor would have no reason to be merciful. If she agreed to help, she became complicit in her father's capture. She'd be the bait that lured him into Victor's trap, the Judas who sold him for 30 pieces of silver, or in this case, for her own freedom and the thin hope of answers to 20-year-old questions. There was no good choice, only degrees of betrayal and complicity. You look troubled. Catherine appeared on the path, wrapped in a long coat against the cold. May I? Elena gestured to the bench. Catherine sat, maintaining a respectful distance, saying nothing for several minutes. The silence was oddly comfortable. Victor told you about your father, Catherine said finally. Not a question. Does everyone here know my business? Only the people Victor trusts to help manage it, which is fewer than you'd think. Catherine looked out over the gardens. For what it's worth, I think he's being sincere about the contract. He could simply kill your father and be done with it. The fact that he's offering alternatives suggests he actually cares about what you think. Or he's manipulating me into caring about what he thinks. Hard to tell the difference. True. Victor is exceptionally good at making his interests appear to align with yours. Catherine's smile was slight. But manipulation doesn't mean dishonesty. He genuinely believes this contract is fair, that your father deserves accountability but not destruction. Whether you agree is a different question. Elena turned to look at her. What would you do if it were your father? My father sold me to pay his gambling debts when I was 16, so my perspective might be skewed. Catherine's voice was flat, emotionless. But if I had a father who'd spent 20 years watching from a distance, who'd sent money and tried to protect me even while staying hidden, I'd want to know why. I'd want to understand what he was thinking, what he was feeling, whether he ever regretted his choices. And you'd help Victor capture him to get those answers? I'd facilitate a conversation that might give both of us what we need. Your father gets a chance to avoid prison or death. You get a chance to understand your past. Victor gets his money back and his reputation maintained. Everyone wins something, even if nobody gets everything. That's a very optimistic interpretation of coercion and betrayal. It's a realistic interpretation of how the world actually works. Catherine stood, brushing invisible dirt from her coat. You've been here long enough to understand that morality is complicated, Elena. The question isn't whether this situation is fair. It's not. The question is whether you can live with the choice you make. Either choice. Can you live with helping Victor? Can you live with refusing and watching your father get caught anyway, knowing you could have influenced the outcome? She left Elena alone with questions that had no satisfying answers. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Elena worked in the kitchen mechanically, her hands performing familiar tasks while her mind churned. Anna tried to engage her in conversation and gave up when Elena's responses were monosyllabic. Margaret took one look at her face and assigned her to solo tasks that didn't require interaction. Evening came. Elena skipped dinner, claiming a headache that wasn't entirely a lie. She lay on her bed staring at the contract, reading the same paragraphs over and over until the words lost meaning. 15 years of servitude, 70% wage garnishment, no possibility of early termination except through complete repayment or death. Antonio Rossi would spend the rest of his productive life owned by the man he'd stolen from, a living example of what happened when you crossed Victor Caldero. But he'd be alive, he'd be safe, and Elena would finally get answers. Was that worth the price? Around midnight, someone knocked. Elena expected Margaret checking on her, or maybe Catherine with more philosophical perspectives. Instead, she opened the door to find Victor holding 2 glasses of wine. You look like you could use this, he said, offering one. Elena took it because refusing felt like more effort than accepting. Is this where you pressure me for a decision? This is where I acknowledge that I've asked you to do something difficult and wait to see if you need to talk about it. Victor leaned against the doorframe, making no move to enter. You've been alone with this all day. Sometimes thinking in circles just makes you dizzier. Talking to you won't make the decision easier. No, but it might make it clearer. He took a sip of wine. Ask me what you really want to know, Elena, not the surface questions about contracts and terms. The real question underneath all of this. Elena met his gaze directly. Why do you care? You could force me to help you. You could threaten my mother, threaten me, make cooperation the only viable option. Instead, you're giving me wine and pretending this is my choice. Why? Victor was quiet for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Because I've spent 15 years building an organization based on loyalty rather than fear. Fear works in the short term, but loyalty is what sustains power over time. And loyalty only comes when people believe they have agency, when they choose to follow rather than being forced. So this is still manipulation, just more sophisticated manipulation. Everything is manipulation, Elena. Every conversation, every relationship, every choice. We're all constantly influencing each other, trying to get what we need while giving others enough to keep them cooperative. He set his wine glass on the floor and crossed his arms. But influence isn't the same as force. I'm giving you a real choice here. You can refuse to help, and I'll pursue your father without you. You'll lose the opportunity to meet him, to have a relationship, to influence the terms of his capture. But you can refuse. That option exists. And you'll respect that refusal? I'll accept it. Respect is earned, not given. Victor's smile was slight. But yes, I'll accept it and adjust my strategy accordingly. You're more valuable to me as a willing ally than a resentful prisoner. Elena took a long drink of wine, letting the warmth spread through her chest. Everyone keeps talking about choices and agency like I have real power here, but every option you've given me is constrained by circumstances you created. That's not freedom. That's just a prettier cage. True, but a prettier cage is still better than an ugly one. Victor picked up his glass again. Look, I'm not going to pretend this situation is fair or that you should be grateful for my generosity. You were pulled into a conflict that had nothing to do with you because Marco decided to use you as currency. That's his fault, not yours. But you're here now, and the question is what you do with these circumstances. I survive. That's what I do. You're already doing more than surviving. You're building relationships, earning trust, carving out space for yourself in my world. Victor's gaze was steady. You're stronger than you think, Elena. Stronger than Marco expected. Stronger than your father probably hoped. Maybe even stronger than I anticipated. The question is whether you'll use that strength to protect yourself or to protect someone who abandoned you 20 years ago. He's still my father. He's a stranger who shares your DNA and made some financial contributions to your unknown account. Everything else is projection and wishful thinking. Victor's voice gentled slightly. I'm not trying to talk you out of helping him. I'm trying to make sure you understand what you're choosing and why. Elena set down her wine glass, her hands steady, despite the turmoil inside. What if I agree to help, but my father refuses the contract? What if he'd rather run than submit to 15 years of servitude? Then I let him run and we start this dance all over again. But he's older now, more tired, more vulnerable. And he knows I found him once. Finding him again will be easier. Victor's expression was pragmatic. Eventually, he'll either accept my terms or make a fatal mistake. The outcome is inevitable. The timeline is what's negotiable. You're telling me this to make me feel less guilty about cooperating. I'm telling you this to give you all the information you need to make an informed choice. What you do with that information is up to you. Victor finished his wine and straightened. I'll need your answer by morning. Whatever you decide, we move forward tomorrow, either with your help or without it. He left, taking his glass and leaving Elena alone with hers and her thoughts. She didn't sleep that night. She paced her room, rehearsed conversations she'd never have, imagined confrontations with a father she barely remembered. She thought about her mother, who'd spent 20 years believing in a lie. About Marco, who'd used Elena's love as currency for his escape. About Victor, who spoke about loyalty and choices while holding all the actual power. And she thought about herself, about who she'd been before the wedding that never happened, and who she was becoming in its aftermath. The transformation wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was incremental, each small compromise adding up to a person who could contemplate betraying her father to secure her own future. Dawn came gray and cold. Elena showered, dressed in jeans and a sweater from the closet, and made her decision. She found Victor in his office at 8 o'clock, already working, looking like he'd slept perfectly well despite the weight of the decisions ahead. I'll help you, Elena said without preamble. But I have conditions. Victor set down his coffee and gave her his full attention. I'm listening. First, when my father contacts me, I get to talk to him alone before any negotiations begin. 5 minutes, just the two of us, no witnesses. Agreed, but monitored. You can have privacy, but not secrecy. Elena nodded, expecting that. Second, if he agrees to the contract, I want the terms modified. 60% wage garnishment instead of 70%. And after 10 years, we renegotiate based on his health and productivity. Victor's eyebrows rose. You're negotiating on his behalf? I'm ensuring that if I'm going to help you trap him, the trap isn't cruel. He's in his 50s. 15 years at 70% garnishment might kill him before the debt is repaid. That helps no one. Interesting. Victor considered for a moment. 60%, but only if he maintains perfect compliance for the first 3 years. One violation, it goes back to 70%. And renegotiation after 10 years will consider productivity, but health concerns are his problem, not mine. Deal. Elena's voice was steadier than she felt. Third condition. Once this is resolved, once my father either accepts or refuses the contract and the situation is settled, you let me go. Truly go. No more surveillance, no more monitoring, no more using me as leverage against him or anyone else. Victor was quiet for a long moment, studying her with that unsettling intensity. That's the one condition I can't guarantee. Well, then we don't have a deal. Let me finish. Victor leaned back in his chair. I can't guarantee your freedom because I can't control what Marco does or whether other people your father wronged will try to use you against him. What I can guarantee is that I won't actively prevent you from leaving once this situation is resolved. If you want to disappear, start over somewhere new. I won't stop you. But I also won't protect you if you leave. I'll take that risk. Will you? Because protection is worth more than you think in this world. Victor's smile was slight. But fine. Once your father's situation is resolved, you're free to go. I'll even help you disappear properly if you want. New identity, new city, enough money to start over clean. Consider it payment for your cooperation. The offer was suspiciously generous. What's the catch? No catch. If you help me resolve this situation without it becoming a bloodbath, I'll owe you. I pay my debts, just like I expect others to pay theirs. Victor extended his hand across the desk. Do we have an agreement? Elena looked at his hand, at the choice it represented. Shaking it meant committing to a path she'd never wanted, to becoming something she'd sworn she'd never become. It meant betraying her father to a man who'd kidnapped her, compromising her principles to secure a freedom that should never have been taken in the first place. But it also meant answers, understanding, a future that extended beyond this estate and these constraints. She shook his hand. His grip was firm, his skin warm, his expression satisfied but not smug. Good, Victor said. Now we wait for your father to make contact. Based on the pattern of his monitoring, I'd guess within the next 48 hours. He'll want to know if you're safe, if you need help, whether the elopement story is real. And when he contacts me, you tell him the truth, most of it anyway, that Marco betrayed you, that you're with me, that you're safe but need his help to truly be free. You arrange a meeting in neutral territory. We'll handle the details, but the emotional persuasion has to come from you. Elena nodded, her stomach tight with anxiety and something that might have been anticipatory grief. And if he refuses to meet? Then we move to less pleasant options. But I don't think he will. He's been watching you for 20 years, Elena. He won't abandon you now. The confidence in Victor's voice was absolute. Elena wondered if her father had that kind of certainty about her, or if he'd spent 2 decades second-guessing his choice to leave, wondering if his daughter would hate him when the truth finally came out. She was about to find out. The next 2 days crawled by with agonizing slowness. Elena worked in the kitchen, went through her routines, tried to act normal despite the constant anxiety humming beneath her skin. Every time the phone buzzed, her heart jumped. Every unfamiliar sound made her tense. Victor appeared at meals, in the gardens, at random moments throughout the day. Not hovering, but present, a reminder of the agreement they'd made and the consequences ahead. On the 3rd morning, the phone finally rang. Elena was in her room reading when it happened, the sudden sound shattering the quiet. She grabbed the phone, hands shaking, and saw an unknown number on the screen. Not Victor. Someone else. She answered. Hello. Static, then a man's voice, rough with emotion and years. Elena, is this really you? Her breath caught. The voice was familiar and foreign at once, an echo from childhood overlaid with adult weariness. Dad? Thank God. He sounded like he might cry. I've been trying to reach you for days. The wedding, the elopement story, none of it made sense. Are you safe? Did someone hurt you? Where are you really? Elena closed her eyes, fighting her own tears. 20 years of absence, 20 years of questions, and now here he was, just a voice on a phone, but unmistakably real. I'm okay, she managed. I'm safe. But Dad, we need to talk. There's so much I need to tell you. I know about Marco. I know what he did. Her father's voice hardened. I'm going to kill him for involving you in this. You can't. He's gone. Probably somewhere you'll never find him. Elena took a breath, steadying herself. But there's someone who can find him. Someone who wants to help us. Someone I need you to meet. Silence on the line, heavy with suspicion. Who? Victor Caldero. The name landed like a bomb. Her father's breathing changed, quickened, fear bleeding through the connection. No, absolutely not. Elena, listen to me. I'm with him now. I've been with him since the wedding. He took me from the hotel, brought me to his estate. Elena spoke quickly before her father could interrupt. He knows about the money you took, about the account Marco stole from. He knows you're alive, and he wants to negotiate. There's nothing to negotiate. He'll kill me. He won't. I promise you, he won't. Elena's voice cracked. Dad, please, I need to see you. I need to understand what happened, why you left, all of it, and this might be our only chance. It's a trap. Of course it's a trap, but it's also an opportunity. Elena glanced toward her door, knowing Victor was probably listening to every word. He's offering you a contract, terms for repayment that don't involve prison or death. It's not perfect, but it's better than running for the rest of your life. Elena, you don't understand what you're asking. I understand perfectly. I'm asking you to trust me, to meet with me and Victor, hear what he has to say, and make your own choice about what happens next. Her voice was steady now, conviction replacing fear. You've been watching me for 20 years. Now it's time to actually be here, to stop running and face what you did. Silence again, stretching so long Elena thought he'd hung up. Then, quietly, where? Relief flooded through her. Victor will arrange the details, somewhere public, lots of witnesses, no weapons. You'll be safe. I haven't been safe in 20 years. Her father's laugh was bitter. But for you, I'll take the risk. Just promise me. If this goes wrong, you run. You disappear and never look back. I promise, Elena lied, knowing she'd never run, knowing whatever happened next would define the rest of her life. They spoke for a few more minutes, making arrangements, confirming details. When Elena finally ended the call, her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped the phone. A knock at her door. Victor entered without waiting for permission, his expression unreadable. You did well, he said, very convincing. I wasn't acting. I know, that's what made it effective. Victor held out a folder. The meeting is set for tomorrow. Noon at Cafe Bellini in the city. Public space, security cameras, plenty of civilians. Your father will feel safer there. Elena took the folder, but didn't open it. And after tomorrow, when he agrees or refuses, then we all move forward with whatever choice he makes. Victor's gaze was steady. You kept your end of our bargain, Elena. Now I'll keep mine. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this would end with her freedom and her father's survival. But she'd learned too much about Victor's world to believe in simple resolutions. Tomorrow would bring answers. Tomorrow would bring consequences. Tomorrow, Elena would finally meet the father who'd haunted her entire life. And whatever happened after that, nothing would ever be the same. The morning of the meeting arrived with crystalline clarity, the kind of sharp winter day that made everything feel hyper-real. Elena woke before dawn, too anxious to sleep, and spent the hours before sunrise rehearsing conversations that would never happen the way she imagined. By the time Margaret knocked with breakfast, Elena had already showered and dressed in the clothes Victor had sent up. Dark jeans, a cream sweater, a leather jacket that looked expensive but felt like armor. You barely touched your food, Margaret observed when she returned an hour later to collect the tray. I'm not hungry. Nerves, I imagine. Margaret's expression was sympathetic. For what it's worth, Mr. Caldero keeps his promises. If he said this meeting will be safe, it will be. Elena wanted to believe that, wanted to trust that Victor's word meant something, that the careful negotiations and terms meant he genuinely intended a peaceful resolution. But she'd learned that trust was dangerous, that people lied even when they seemed sincere, that nothing was certain until it was over. The drive to the city took 90 minutes. Elena sat in the back of the black car with Victor, Svetlana driving, two more vehicles following at a discreet distance. Security, Victor called it. Insurance, Elena thought. A reminder that even in a public cafe surrounded by civilians, power dynamics remained unchanged. You're quiet, Victor said as they merged onto the highway. What do you want me to say? I want you to tell me what you're thinking, whether you're having second thoughts, whether you need reassurance, whether you're planning something foolish. Elena turned to look at him. He was dressed simply today, dark slacks and a charcoal sweater, looking more like a businessman heading to a casual meeting than a crime lord orchestrating a confrontation 20 years in the making. I'm thinking that this is the moment everything changes. Either my father agrees to your terms and I get answers, but lose him to your organization for 15 years, or he refuses and spends the rest of his life running from you while I wonder if I made the right choice. Elena's voice was steady. I'm thinking that no matter what happens today, I'll never be the person I was before my wedding. That girl is gone, and I'm not sure who I'm becoming in her place. Victor was quiet for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. You're becoming someone who survives impossible situations and comes out stronger. That's not a small thing. It's not a good thing either. Survival shouldn't require this much compromise. In a perfect world, you're right. But we don't live in a perfect world. We live in this one, where people make terrible choices and other people deal with the consequences. He looked out the window at the landscape rushing past. For what it's worth, I think you're handling this remarkably well. Most people would have broken by now. Maybe I'm just good at hiding it. Maybe. Or maybe you're stronger than you give yourself credit for. The compliment felt wrong coming from him, tainted by everything he'd done. Elena didn't respond. She spent the rest of the drive watching the city grow closer, steel and glass rising against the pale sky. Café Bellini was in a busy district nestled between high-end boutiques and office buildings. Victor's people had chosen well, public enough to feel safe, upscale enough to discourage problems, positioned perfectly for surveillance. Elena could see at least 3 of Victor's men positioned around the block, pretending to browse shop windows or sit at outdoor tables despite the cold. They arrived 15 minutes early. Victor led Elena inside, where a corner booth in the back provided clear sightlines to both entrances and minimal exposure to the other patrons. The cafe was moderately busy, the lunch crowd just beginning to filter in. Classical music played softly in the background. Everything looked normal, civilized, utterly at odds with the tension coiling in Elena's chest. "He'll sit there," Victor said, indicating the seat across from Elena. "You'll have your 5 minutes alone while I wait at the counter. After that, I join the conversation and we discuss terms. Understood?" "What if he tries to run?" "He won't make it to the door, but I don't think he will. He came here for you, Elena. He's not going to leave without at least trying to fix this." Elena ordered coffee she wouldn't drink and waited, her heart hammering against her ribs. The minutes crawled by. 11:45, 11:50, 11:55. At noon exactly, the door opened and a man walked in. 20 years had changed Antonio Rossi more than the photographs suggested. He was grayer, thinner, worn down by time and stress in ways that no surveillance image could capture. But his eyes, dark brown, just like Elena's, were immediately familiar. She'd seen them in mirrors her entire life, had wondered if her father's eyes crinkled the same way when he smiled, if they carried the same sadness she sometimes glimpsed in her own reflection. Now she knew. He spotted her immediately, his expression crumbling with relief and grief and something that might have been shame. He crossed the cafe like a man walking to his own execution, each step weighted with 20 years of absence. "Elena," her name broke on his lips, "my baby girl, look at you." Elena stood because her legs wouldn't let her stay seated. 20 years of anger and longing and confusion rose in her throat, choking off words. Her father stopped 3 feet away, close enough to touch but not quite daring, his hands trembling at his sides. "Can I—" He gestured awkwardly. "Can I hug you?" She should say no. Should maintain distance, keep armor intact, protect herself from the emotional devastation of allowing this stranger back into her life. But her body moved before her mind could stop it, closing the distance, falling into arms that felt simultaneously foreign and like coming home. Antonio Rossi held his daughter for the first time in 20 years and wept. Elena felt her own tears spill over, hot and unwelcome, soaking into her father's jacket. She'd sworn she wouldn't cry, wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing how much his abandonment had hurt, but the promise dissolved in the reality of his presence, in the solid warmth of him, in the desperate way he clung to her like she might disappear if he let go. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I'm so sorry, baby. I never wanted to leave you, never wanted any of this." They stood there for a long moment, 2 people connected by biology and history, but separated by choices that couldn't be undone. Finally, Elena pulled back, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "Sit," she managed. "We need to talk." They slid into the booth, sitting across from each other, a lifetime of questions hanging in the air between them. Elena could see Victor at the counter, his back to them, but certainly listening to every word through whatever surveillance equipment his people had planted. "You look so much like your mother," Antonio said, his voice rough with emotion. "Same eyes, same stubborn chin. She always said you'd grow up beautiful. She was right." "Don't." Elena's voice was sharper than she intended. "Don't talk about Mom like you have any right to comment on her life. You left us. You let her believe you were dead. You let her struggle for 20 years while you hid from your own mistakes." Antonio flinched but nodded. "You're right. I have no right. I gave up the right to be part of your lives when I stole that money and ran." "But why did you do it? Why risk everything? Why destroy our family for money?" "Because I was desperate and stupid, and convinced myself I could get away with it." Antonio's hands were shaking. "Your mother was pregnant with your brother. We had medical bills piling up from complications with the pregnancy. I was in debt to people who don't accept late payments. I saw an opportunity to skim from accounts Victor Caldero would never notice, just enough to get clear, and I took it. Just enough turned into $12 million. I know. It started small, but once I'd crossed that line, going back seemed impossible. So I kept going, kept stealing, kept telling myself it would be fine." Antonio's voice cracked. "And then Victor's people noticed. They started asking questions. I knew I had days, maybe hours before they figured out it was me. So I took what I could access and ran." Elena absorbed this, trying to reconcile the desperate man her father described with the villain Victor had painted. "You let us believe you were dead." "I had to. If Victor thought you knew where I was, he'd use you to find me. The only way to keep you safe was to make sure you genuinely believed I was gone." Antonio reached across the table but stopped short of touching her hand. "I've watched you grow up from a distance, Elena. I've seen you graduate, seen you struggle, seen you try so hard to build a good life despite everything I put you through, and I've hated myself every single day for not being there. You sent money to an account I never knew existed. I wanted you to have something when you were old enough to understand. When you turned 18, I set up the automatic deposits. I thought maybe someday I could contact you, explain everything, give you access to the money I'd been saving for your future." His smile was bitter. "Then Marco found out somehow, found the account, found the connection, and used it to frame you." "Did you know him? Before the wedding?" "Never met him, but I'd been monitoring your life from a distance. When you got engaged, I looked into him. Nothing suspicious on the surface, but I should have dug deeper. Should have warned you somehow." Antonio's jaw tightened. "When he emptied that account and you disappeared from your wedding, I knew something terrible had happened. I've been trying to find you ever since. And now you have. I'm here. I'm alive. And I'm asking you to make a choice that will determine both our futures." Antonio's expression shifted, fear replacing grief. "Victor Caldero wants me dead." "No." Elena glanced toward the counter where Victor waited patiently. "He wants you to work off the debt. 15 years, well, I negotiated it down to potentially 10, working for his organization at reduced wages until the money is repaid. It's not ideal, but it's not death either. It's slavery. It's accountability. You stole from him, Dad. That debt is real and it needs to be addressed." Elena leaned forward, her voice urgent. "I know it's not fair. I know it's not what you want. But it's better than spending the rest of your life running, better than getting caught by people who won't offer contracts, better than dying alone in some foreign country while your family thinks you've been dead for 20 years. You're asking me to surrender to the man I've been hiding from for 2 decades. I'm asking you to face the consequences of your choices so we can both move forward." Elena's voice broke. "I need you to do this, Dad. I need to know you're safe, that you're alive, that maybe someday we can have some kind of relationship. Victor is giving us that chance. The only chance we're going to get." Antonio stared at her, reading the desperation in her expression. "What did he do to you, to make you believe this is acceptable?" "He showed me what happens to people who cross him and don't accept his mercy. He made me understand that your options are limited to his terms or his wrath." Elena's hands clenched into fists. "But he also kept his promises to me. He said if I helped arrange this meeting, if I convinced you to come, He'd let me go afterward. Free and clear, no more surveillance, no more threats. That's what I'm choosing, Dad. My freedom in exchange for your cooperation. That's not a choice. That's extortion. It's the reality of our situation. Elena felt Victor's presence approaching, his 5 minutes clearly up. Please, please just listen to what he has to say. Victor slid into the booth beside Elena, his movement fluid and confident. Antonio stiffened, years of fear manifesting in rigid shoulders and white knuckles gripping the table edge. Mr. Rossi. Victor's voice was cordial, almost friendly. Thank you for coming. I know this isn't easy. You kidnapped my daughter. I removed your daughter from a dangerous situation created by a man who used her as leverage against both of us. There's a difference. Victor's expression remained neutral. But I'm not here to debate methodology. I'm here to offer you a resolution that allows everyone to walk away from this alive and relatively intact. Antonio's laugh was bitter. You call 15 years of indentured servitude a resolution. I call it fair compensation for $12 million plus 20 years of interest. If you'd like, I can calculate the exact amount you owe with compound interest. The number might surprise you. Victor pulled out a tablet and turned it toward Antonio. This is the contract Elena negotiated on your behalf. Read it. Take your time. Elena watched her father's face as he read, saw the hope drain away with each paragraph, each clause, each restriction. The terms were brutal in their clarity. 60% wage garnishment, 10 years minimum before renegotiation, complete compliance required, violation resulting in immediate termination of the agreement and resumption of active pursuit. This is my life, Antonio said quietly. You're asking for my life. I'm asking for the next decade of your productivity in exchange for not taking your life permanently. The math seems straightforward to me. Victor's tone was matter of fact. You stole from my organization. You disrupted operations, endangered people, broke trust that I'd extended. Those actions have consequences. I'm offering you a path to redemption that doesn't end in a grave. Redemption. Antonio's voice dripped with sarcasm. You're offering slavery and calling it redemption. I'm offering employment with garnished wages and calling it what it is, a debt repayment plan. You'll work in my organization doing what you did before you stole from me. Accounting, ledgers, financial management. You're good at it when you're not stealing. I can use those skills productively. And if I refuse? Victor's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Then you leave this cafe and spend the rest of your life running from me and everyone else you wronged. I'll freeze your assets, alert law enforcement internationally, and make it impossible for you to exist in the modern world. You'll die alone, penniless, and alienated from your family. That's your alternative. Antonio looked at Elena, desperation clear in his expression. And you think this is acceptable? You think I should surrender to this? Elena felt the weight of the choice crushing her. I think it's the only option that keeps you alive and in my life. I think refusing means I never see you again, never get answers, never have a chance to know you as an adult instead of as a grieving child. Her voice wavered. I think I'm being selfish by wanting you to agree, but I also think you owe me this. You owe me 20 years of absence, 20 years of questions, 20 years of wondering why I wasn't enough to make you stay. The words hung in the air like shattered glass. Antonio's face crumpled, tears spilling freely now. You were always enough, he whispered. Leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done. Every day since has been punishment worse than anything Victor could devise. Then let this be the end of your punishment. Accept the contract, serve your time, and when it's over, we can have a real relationship. We can be a family again. Elena reached across the table, finally taking her father's hand. Please, Dad. Please just do this one thing. Antonio looked at their joined hands, at his daughter's face pleading with him, at Victor's implacable expression. Elena could see the calculations happening behind his eyes, the weighing of options, the assessment of odds, the desperate search for any alternative that didn't exist. Finally, he looked at Victor. I want to talk to my daughter alone. One more time. Just 5 minutes. Victor considered, then nodded and stood. 5 minutes. But understand, Mr. Rossi, if you try to convince her to run with you, my people will stop you before you reach the door. This is your chance to say goodbye or to commit to a future. Choose wisely. He walked back to the counter, leaving them alone again. Antonio gripped Elena's hand tighter. Listen to me very carefully. You don't owe me anything. Not forgiveness, not relationship, not this sacrifice you're making. I destroyed our family through my own greed and cowardice. You have every right to walk away and never look back. I know that. But you're not going to, are you? You're going to keep pushing for this because you want answers, want closure, want some fantasy reconciliation that might never actually happen. Antonio's voice was gentle but firm. Elena, even if I sign this contract, even if I work for Victor for the next 10 years, we might not get the relationship you're hoping for. I might be bitter, broken, resentful. I might not be the father you remember or the man you want me to be. I know that too, but I'd rather have the possibility of knowing you than the certainty of never seeing you again. Antonio was quiet for a long moment, his thumb rubbing circles on the back of her hand the way he used to when she was small and scared. The gesture unlocked a memory so vivid it hurt. Her father comforting her after a nightmare, promising her she was safe, that he'd always protect her. He'd broken that promise 20 years ago. Maybe this was his chance to make it right. If I do this, he said slowly, you have to promise me something. Anything. You have to actually leave. Take Victor's offer of a new identity, a new city, a fresh start. Don't wait around trying to maintain a relationship with me while I'm working off this debt. Build your own life, find your own happiness. Stop letting my mistakes define your future. Dad, promise me, Elena. That's my condition. I'll sign the contract, I'll work off the debt, but only if you promise to actually be free. No visiting, no phone calls, no trying to fix what's broken between us until my debt is paid, and I'm actually free to be part of your life. His eyes were fierce. Can you do that? Elena wanted to argue, to insist they could have both, his compliance and their relationship. But she saw the logic in his demand, the protective instinct of a father who'd already sacrificed too much and was determined to give his daughter one final gift. I promise, she said, the words tasting like goodbye. Good. Antonio squeezed her hand once more, then released it. Then I'll do it. I'll sign the contract, serve my time, and when it's over, if you still want to know me, we'll start fresh. He called Victor back to the table. The crime lord slid into the booth with the satisfied expression of someone who'd known all along how this would end. We have an agreement? Victor asked. We have terms, Antonio corrected. I signed the contract with the modifications Elena negotiated. 60% garnishment, renegotiation after 10 years. I work off the debt without complaint, without attempting escape, without contacting my family until the debt is satisfied. And in exchange, you let my daughter go, truly go. New identity, new city, enough money to start over, and your word that she's free of all of this. Antonio's voice was steel. She doesn't visit me, doesn't contact me, doesn't get pulled back into your world for any reason. That's non-negotiable. Victor looked at Elena, reading something in her expression. She agreed to this? She promised. Then we have a deal. Victor produced a pen from his jacket. Sign here, initial here, and here, date at the bottom. Welcome back to my organization, Mr. Rossi. Antonio took the pen with shaking hands. Elena watched him sign his freedom away, watched him commit to a decade of servitude, watched him make the sacrifice he believed would save her. Each stroke of the pen felt like a door closing, like a chapter ending, like the death of possibility. When it was done, Victor collected the contract and stood. My people will escort you to your new quarters. You start work Monday morning, 9 a.m. sharp. Don't be late. Wait. Elena stood too, panic rising. I don't get to... We can't even... You made a promise to your father. Victor's voice was gentle but firm. He made his sacrifice for you. Honor it by keeping your word. Antonio stood and pulled Elena into one more embrace, fierce and brief and final. I love you, he whispered into her hair. I'm sorry I wasn't the father you deserved, but I'm so proud of who you've become despite me. I love you too, Dad. Then let me go. Let me do this knowing you're going to be okay. He released her and walked away with Victor's people, his shoulders straight despite the weight of the choice he'd made. Elena watched him leave through tears that wouldn't stop falling, watched the door close behind him, watched her father disappear from her life for the second time in 20 years. But this time she knew where he was. This time it was temporary. This time there was hope. Victor appeared at her elbow with a folder. Your new identity, Sarah Mitchell, born and raised in Portland, relocated to Denver for work. Bank account with $50,000, apartment lease, complete documentation. You have 72 hours to say goodbye to your mother and collect anything from your old life you want to keep. After that, Elena Rossi disappears. Elena took the folder with numb hands. Why are you doing this? You have my father. You don't need to give me anything. I keep my promises. You helped resolve the situation peacefully, negotiated terms that satisfied everyone, and proved yourself valuable in ways I didn't anticipate. Victor's expression was unreadable. Consider it professional respect. And insurance. If you disappear properly, your father has no reason to break his contract trying to protect you. You think of everything. I try. Victor gestured toward the door. Svetlana will drive you wherever you need to go. You have 3 days, Elena. Use them wisely. The next 72 hours blurred into a surreal montage of endings. Elena visited her mother, spinning elaborate lies about Marco leaving her for someone else, about needing a fresh start somewhere new. Her mother cried and held her and made her promise to call, to write, to never forget where she came from. Elena promised, knowing she'd break every commitment the moment she became Sarah Mitchell. She collected her few possessions from the apartment she'd never see again: photographs, books, a necklace her mother had given her for her 18th birthday. Everything else she left behind, artifacts of a life that had ended the moment Victor Caldero walked into her bridal suite. On the final day, she found herself back at Blackthorn, standing in the kitchen where she'd spent the past weeks learning to survive in a world she'd never wanted to understand. Margaret was there, kneading bread with the same steady rhythm that had provided structure to Elena's chaos. Come to say goodbye? Margaret asked without looking up. Come to say thank you for treating me like a person instead of a prisoner, for teaching me that survival doesn't have to mean losing yourself completely. You taught yourself that, dear. I just provided the kitchen. Margaret finally looked up, her expression warm. You're going to be fine, you know. You're stronger than you think. Everyone keeps saying that. Because it's true. Margaret wiped flour from her hands and pulled Elena into a brief hug. Now go. Build your new life. Forget about all of this. But Elena knew she'd never forget. The past weeks had branded themselves onto her soul, changing her in ways she was only beginning to understand. She left Blackthorn for the last time as the sun set, turning the estate golden and beautiful and utterly alien. Victor waited by the car, his expression unreadable as always. Everything you need is in the trunk, he said, including a phone with one number programmed, mine. If you ever need help, if you're ever in danger, call me. That offer doesn't expire. Why would I ever call you after everything you've done? Because you're smart enough to recognize that having powerful allies is better than having powerful enemies. And because despite everything, I think we understand each other now. Elena wanted to deny it, to insist they had nothing in common, that she'd never be like him. But she could feel the truth in his words, the uncomfortable recognition that they'd both been shaped by circumstances beyond their control and had both learned to survive by adapting to impossible constraints. Goodbye, Victor. Goodbye, Elena. Or should I say Sarah? His smile was slight. Good luck. I think you're going to need it. She climbed into the car without responding. Svetlana drove her to a bus station, handed her an envelope with cash and documents, and left without ceremony. Elena bought a ticket to Denver using her new ID, sat in the terminal watching people live their normal lives, and tried to process what she'd become. Not Elena Rossi anymore, bride abandoned at the altar. Not a victim or a prisoner. Not even really a survivor, because survival implied the danger had passed. She was Sarah Mitchell now, a woman with a manufactured past and uncertain future, carrying secrets that would never be fully told. She was someone who'd negotiated with criminals, who'd helped capture her own father, who'd learned that morality was complicated and choices were never clean. She was someone she barely recognized, but was learning to accept. The bus pulled out of the station at midnight, carrying her toward a city she'd never seen and a life she'd never planned. Elena, Sarah, leaned her head against the window and watched the lights fade behind her, each mile putting distance between who she'd been and who she was becoming. Somewhere in Victor Caldero's organization, her father was beginning his decade of repayment, working off a debt he'd accumulated through desperation and poor choices. In 10 years, if he survived, if he stayed compliant, they might have a chance at the relationship they'd lost. 10 years felt like forever. It also felt like a gift she'd never expected to receive. Sarah closed her eyes and let the bus carry her into the unknown. She didn't know what waited in Denver, what kind of life she'd build with her manufactured identity and blood money. But she knew she'd survive it. She knew she was stronger than she'd been a month ago, harder and colder and more capable of doing difficult things. The girl who'd believed in fairy tales was gone, killed somewhere between a bridal suite and a criminal's estate. What rose from those ashes was something new, not innocent, not pure, but undeniably alive. And for now, in this moment, being alive was enough. The bus drove on through the darkness, carrying Sarah Mitchell toward a future she'd never wanted but was learning to claim. Behind her, the ruins of Elena Rossi's life smoldered. Ahead, possibilities stretched like an unwritten story. She'd survived the wedding that never happened. She'd survived Victor Caldero's gilded cage. She'd survived betrayal and loss and impossible choices. She would survive this too. And maybe, eventually, she'd do more than survive. Maybe she'd learn to live again, to build something real from the fragments of everything she'd lost. Maybe 10 years from now, when her father's debt was paid and her own wounds had scarred over, they'd find each other again and build something that looked like family. Or maybe she'd never see him again. Maybe Sarah Mitchell would become so complete, so separate from Elena Rossi, that going back would be impossible. Either way, she was free. Damaged, complicated, carrying trauma she'd spend years unpacking, but genuinely free. The bus crossed into Colorado as dawn broke, painting the mountains in shades of pink and gold. Sarah pressed her palm against the cold glass and made herself a promise. She would never be anyone's collateral again, never let anyone steal her agency, never sacrifice her own story for someone else's redemption. She would live, fiercely, completely, on her own terms. And if Victor Caldero or anyone like him ever threatened that again, she'd be ready. Because the girl who'd been kidnapped from her wedding was gone. But the woman who'd negotiated her own freedom, who'd survived a crime lord's estate, who'd made impossible choices and lived to tell about it, that woman was just beginning to understand her own power. Sarah Mitchell smiled at her reflection in the bus window, at the stranger looking back with Elena Rossi's eyes, but none of her innocence. The fairy tale was over. Reality was just beginning. And this time, she'd write her own ending.